This is Las Doctoras podcast with your favorite profas, Dr. Renee Limas
and Doctora Cristina Rose. Join us as we bring women and gender studies topics out of the university and onto the kitchen table.
Salud! Hello.
Hi. Writing down a note to remember. So wonderful to see everyone, or not see everyone, for you to see us. So nice.
Yes. I think I'm like, is this our first recording of the new year, or have we recorded? I can't remember.
This is our first recording, I
of
think.
the new year,
it's only
of 2024. Yes. Las
Yes.
Doctoras podcast.
We're so ready for 2024. It's already been so exciting.
It's already been a doozy.
Yeah. So
yes, and we're so happy to have a guest with us. And I just want to shout out again June for bringing us together. I feel like the last few guests that we have had on have been people we've met through June. So shout out to June McKay.
Thanks, June.
Always, But yes, we want to welcome our guest Nisha and have you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Nisha Mody. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a relational healing and life coach and writer. A lot of my own healing journey started with writing about my own story. Astrology, I'm a Virgo sun, a Sagittarius moon, and a Leo rising.
Wow.
And I feel like I also need to say that I have a Libra stellium in my third house, and like I have like 5 planets in Libra. So even though it's not in my big 3, it's very like really colors my chart. So
yeah.
I gotta mention that.
The third house is
you're the house person. I don't know.
It's like,
the house
you know, siblings communication, like
Ooh,
daily
I love
routines, stuff like that.
Yeah. I have a 4th house stellium. Renee has a 5th house. So we are 3, 4, 5 here. This is very beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah.
In terms of ancestors, I'd like to call in. I'd really like to call in my father, who passed about 11 years ago, and just all of my, you know, I'm South Asian, I'm Indian, so I come from a colonized country, and I've been thinking about that a lot in terms of my lineage, and even thinking about my elders who are alive, who will be future ancestors at some point, and just, you know, just calling in their energy too, because they have that colonized stuff in their epigenetics that I'm sure has been passed down. And that's a lot of the reason I do what I do, which is I really try to support people to live meaningful lives outside of the context of colonialism and capitalism. And when I say outside, I mean, we can't leave it, you know, it's here.
Right.
But knowing that, you know, we are conditioned in this way and that we can still live meaningful lives. I end up supporting a lot of people who are people of color, Black and Indigenous. I'm not limited to that, but that is a lot of the people who do come to me. And they also end up being people who, just like me, have a lot of compassion towards others in the world, but don't always have that compassion toward themselves. They see themselves as helpers, probably make a living out of it on some level, and still struggle with having that helping others, but not always helping themselves or having that compassion for themselves. So the magic I bring is my own experience, as well as my ability to come from this relational lens. And that's why I call myself a relational healing and life coach. It's not like a relationship coach, like per se, though of course that comes into the equations. Relationships are inherently part of our lives, but thinking more about how we're relating to ourselves, how we're relating to each other, how we're relating to the earth, and how that informs the ideas we have and how we connect with each other. So yeah, that is my magic.
I love beautifully it. Said, and so much resonance and
so much resonance. Yeah. And I think so. Let's dive in because
we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah. I've been following you, and I think I know for myself, after October 7th, and there was so much, I keep saying I haven't witnessed this much divisiveness online. I mean, even beyond like the Trump years and COVID, and this is a very like this is just a very I don't even know what to call it. It's just it's a lot, and I felt like I was in those early months. God, it's kind of crazy to say that, but like looking for the voice of reason, or looking for like where is somebody that's gonna say something that
people
helps me make sense of not even the world, because that you can do on some level intellectually, but like help me to make sense of my own feelings. And so I felt like coming across some of your reels really brought to light some of the things that I was feeling, some of the things that we've been feeling, and some of the things that we've been hearing in our community. And so one of the reels you posted around shame and the ways that, in the, I'm like, in the community of those who are advocating for a free Palestine, there tends to be, and maybe it's not just even in this moment. I think really in all in
this has existed always.
Yes,
right? It's always been those who are
using shame as a means to try to like bring people in, or to say like, hey, you need to be saying something, you need to be doing something. But
if not, you're an oppressor. Silence is violence, right?
Yeah, and using the shameful language, which I think I understand where that comes from, and at the same time, you so aptly in your reel kind of named that can sometimes also perpetuate harm if people are already in a cycle of shame. And so it doesn't actually do what we want it to do, which is to bring people into the movement. It actually kind of puts people further into their own shell. I mean, I'm kind of interpreting and paraphrasing, but just this idea of shame and it being used as a tool, but it's not, yeah, I don't know if you want to speak more to that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much to it. There's so many angles, I think, of the shame. There's just the shame cycle that we already might be feeling, like I'm not doing enough, I can't do enough, or what power do I have, or like maybe I can do more, and maybe I know that I'm not willing to give up certain things, certain comforts, I think there's a lot of different types of shame, but then there's also the act of shaming others. And I think there's a purpose of people who do shame others, where we all feel really helpless. So shaming others is a way to say, like, do something. It's a way of forcing something when there is this urgency. Like, yes, this is an urgent situation. And at the same time, I think that if we act from shame, if someone is like on a TikTok or a reel or in their Instagram caption, like, you should be doing something. How I see people who are silent. How can you be silent? I think that it can cause people to maybe take an action from a place of like, I don't want to be a bad person, as opposed to, is this actually taking the time to be like, what are my values? Is this rooted in my values? What are my politics? You know what I mean? And yeah, in time of urgency, maybe people think we don't have time for that. And I think it's really important because, if we just come from this place of like doing something because we feel bad or because someone told us to, it's not going to be sustainable. And I mean, I think another thing with social media is that there's people who are like, who have more influence, who are just being called out for not saying anything when they might not ever really post in their stories about stuff, even though they see themselves as a political person, because that's just how they use social media. And the argument that like this has become such a bigger movement because of social media, and it has the power for that. And therefore making the decision for everyone that that's what they have to do. Social media, if you think about it, it's just been in like the last 20 years. It's so new. And so having this sorry?
And consuming, just thinking about it.
So consuming. Yeah. I don't know if either of you have watched that Social Dilemma, that documentary about social media.
Oh God, no, I'm afraid to watch it.
I mean, a lot of it, to be honest, is I mean, I used to be a librarian, so a lot of it from like the information side, I'm like, okay, I know this. But the part that really stuck with me is that it talking about how our brains have literally not evolved to be able to handle and consume this amount of information. And I mean, it's true. Before social media, you didn't hear people like many people talking about like, I need to detox from the news. I need to detox from TV, because it was just like broadcasting cable TV. Like, yeah, it had an influence, but it wasn't so multi-directional as talking to each other, right? And there's great things about social media, but it has so much power. And because it's at our disposal, we might have the expectation that everyone needs to use it in XYZ way if they say that this is what their values are. And we're not having any idea. Even, I'll say I met you once, Renee, and it was actually in person. And after that, it's been social media. Like, I feel like, I know you through June. There are some values we have, but there's a lot I don't know about you in your life and what's going on. Like,
Yeah.
I met you once, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for me to say that some person isn't saying something and they're bad or whatever, it's like without actually having a conversation with them, it's just kind of not, again, it's not relational. It's making a lot of assumptions about someone and their world and their relationships. And I think that you in the beginning you were like, I don't know what the word is, and I think this has just become it's really sensitive. It's become really sensitive to a lot of people, more than a lot of other things. You're right, and going back to the shame thing. I think shaming others and people, not just shaming others, but people taking action from only shame, like feeling bad, like I'm supposed to do this. I don't think that's something that's sustainable, and it can't really put someone further in a shame spiral. But there's also, like you said, people who are just already in a shame cycle. And I think shame serves a certain purpose, and we have to sit with that shame, to see like, maybe I do want to do more and I'm too scared to talk to my family members. Maybe that is something that I should do, So I'm not saying that if someone shames someone else, like it's never effective, but I don't know if it's necessarily sustainable, because I think there needs to be more conversations about, okay, like what's going on that you cannot even look at an issue like this and think that it's important, or think that you're connected to it, or who are your relationships that you can post about Black Lives Matter, but you really have a hard time saying Free Palestine. I have a couple of good friends who are actors in Hollywood, and we saw what happened with Susan Sarandon, with some other actors that was on that Scream movie. Like, they were dropped by their agencies. Like, this is very affecting people's livelihoods. I know several people in academia, as I'm sure that you also have experienced. Like, this is really affecting people's livelihoods. So there is a certain sensitivity, I think, to this. And I think only acting from shame, or like shaming others, it might have a short-term effect. I mean, I'm not disagreeing that it might have a short-term effect, but for something where we're talking about like not just having a ceasefire, but ending the occupation, that is like very high level relationships and resource connected things that affect our daily lives. Like, that has to be a sustainable like solution, something that's really grounded in principles.
Oh my God, you said a whole like I'm gonna
we be taking notes. We're like,
I know I'm frantically taking notes, because I feel like you articulated
something so important,
and what I've just it's validating for me, because I feel the sustainability has been something that I've been coming back to time and time again.
It is one of your keywords, for sure.
When I see people doing certain things on social media, I'm like, oh my God, that is not sustainable, right? It's not sustainable energetic wise, capacity wise. Like you said, like, so many people where it's affecting their livelihood, like that's not sustainable, right? So there's just there's a lot, there's so many layers, to it. And I think so sustainability is a big thing. And what I hear you, or what I'm sort of hearing is like, when you shame somebody into doing something, and then because I remember early on there was this notion of, I want to be on the right side of history, or you need to be on the right side of history, and that's a shaming frame, like that's framed with a lot of shame. And so then it has people, like you said, doing things that maybe are just performative, right? And so when we talk about like performative activism, it can kind of lend itself to be like, oh, well, I don't want to be on the wrong side of history, so I'm going to do this, without really maybe even taking the time to, like you said, what are my values? Is this in alignment with my values? Is this in alignment with my capacity? This is not a short, I've always said this is not a sprint. This is a marathon, right? Like, we're talking free Palestine forever. That is a huge task, and really, when we say free Palestine, we're saying free all of us, right? Because we're all our liberation is so interconnected. And so it does lend itself, because I think, we said, okay, back in October, November, and now we're in, mid-January, and you do see energy dying down, because I think so much of that early energy was performative, because there was no, I keep thinking there's not an infrastructure to sustain these actions, right? Like
I'm even thinking like the infrastructure, like, those people who do advocacy work, their lives are already kind of on the cusp of unsustainable, given like the resources that they have, and so, like, I think about us, and we're striking next week, and they're at the university, and there's a sense that we have all this time and leisure and pleasure and power.
Oh, get an extra week off.
But choosing to be in women's studies or gender and ethnic studies means we're choosing to be like in advocacy work, which doesn't get paid the big bucks,
already.
It hardly gets paid a living wage.
Yeah.
And other advocates too, it's so similar, right? And so then when they're asked to give more,
to risk that, to ask, like, essentially, we're barely getting paid what we deserve, and now we're going to go on strike, which means they can dock our pay, right? Which is going to have a direct impact on our ability to pay bills, right? And so it is a big thing to ask, right? To say, but I think what's so different about our union, right? This is a long established union, is that there's infrastructure and resources to support that strike, right? To say, hey, if you're going to be out on the picket lines, we're going to feed you, we're going to bus you in, right? There's a strike fund, right? So people who are really in dire need can apply for the strike fund and get funds from the union to be able to support themselves, right? There's
so good. I didn't know any of this.
there's this infrastructure built around these actions. And I feel like, I mean, maybe this is part of a different or longer conversation, but I feel like that's what we need, right? That's what creates sustainability, is to create infrastructure around our actions rather than shame. But I want to get back to you talking about like social media, and it's almost like social media is it's good in that it has brought us together in ways that we couldn't imagine. It's been able to mobilize. It's interesting because people talk about like 9/11, and I think, I don't know, it's been an interesting conversation to reflect on that, but people saying, well, were people protesting against the US actions in the Middle East after 9/11? And I said, yes, they were. But because social media didn't exist at the time, you didn't have the same kind of mobilization that's happening now, right? So had we had social media then, we might have seen more bigger actions around that. So it's interesting to see what social media has done. And then on the other hand, it's created this, I think, false sense of community and connection. Like you said, that we met once, and we might align, but we're not really like speaking, right? And I think that's there's I keep saying there is a lack of like community. I think social media has us thinking we're in community because we're all reposting each other and we're like doing these things.
It is a kind of community, but it is not like,
are we actually like having conversations with each other? And so like I said, I've been having conversations with people who are feeling shamed for what is being perceived as being silent, even though I know what their values are. I know how they step up in their own lives in their own ways, but because they're not posting publicly, they're feeling this shame, and or they're feeling shamed. And I think for me, I've been thinking a lot about like, so what's the alternative, right? Like you said, if shame is productive in the short term,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not sustainable, then what's the alternative? And I feel like rather than saying you should be posting, it's like, hey, I wonder why you're not posting. Is there support that you need to be able to, stand into your voice? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's a better way to, but you have to be in community with somebody and an interesting relationship with somebody to even be able to have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I know a few people who I know are very values aligned who haven't been posting, but they have been having a lot of conversations with people in their, whether it's in their just their Instagram community or not. And I think we can even take it a step back to be like, hey, I'm just checking in with people who are values aligned with me. I know a lot's happening, and I just wanted to see how you were doing and where you were at with this. Because even I feel like that before even posting, it's just like, well, where are you at with this? Because it's true. There are people who are, like decolonial, but are pro-Israel. I mean, that exists, right? Like, and not so much to be like, oh, I'm going to cancel you, but just to like get to understand, it's like, well, what's going on? Or maybe you're just someone who's very connected to a specific community where posting is not something you want to do, but you're completely willing to have a conversation, and that person is taking action in their own ways. Like, cool. Like, I don't think social media is the only way to do it. There's people who are not on social media who are very active, in this world. But yeah, like you said, it has given us a way to mobilize. I've never done political organizing, so I'm not going to directly speak to that. But when I know people, a lot of people who do political organizing work, and there is so much that happens, like you said, in terms of that infrastructure, whether that's for a union, whether that's toward a specific political cause, that is actually about that infrastructure. And, I've seen these calls on the internet, and even from Palestinians, and I'm all about listening to Palestinian voices to call for like a general strike, like do this for a week. And I'm not saying like that's good or bad, but what I'm saying is if that's not really organized or sustainable, it might disrupt things like momentarily, but is it actually going to create, once again, sustainable change? And like,
I've been
I'm
seeing that.
not trying to like knock like Palestinians of all people who might be on the ground, like suffering like in real time. But I also get curious about, okay, like, let's do this, like, but there's people who like, okay, general strike, like a week off. I mean, they might not be able to do that, like from a realistic perspective. And maybe there's something we need to do. Maybe there needs to be more union organizing at the workplace so that people can do that. Because if you're just one person in a workplace taking
Right.
the week
striking
off
that day, is that, and I'm saying this actually very recently. I have a friend who actually just posted about this, so I don't want to completely take credit for it.
I sent it to you, right? It's for next week. There's like
yeah.
we're happy
I
to be
saw
striking
that,
already.
and I'm like,
So
okay, like I won't go to the bank. I won't, but I'm just like, well, I mean, it's not like I'm against that idea, but I'm curious, like, okay, what's again sustainability? And I'm like, am I supposed to feel bad if I don't do this? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But yeah, so there's just so many layers.
I mean, you're saying exactly what I've been thinking, not saying, because I agree. It does totally, the general strike that's being called for is in alignment with our strike. So I'm like, oh cool, we're already striking. So, but like you said, the sustainability of it, because it's like, okay, so we're not gonna, like you said, not gonna go do these things, but we still need to do those things. So are we just gonna wait until after? Like, so it's not really dismantling, or it's not really like hurting the system, because we actually have to, what are long-term ways to divest from the system altogether beyond just the week, right? And I think that's where more attention should be, or not. Again, we're not trying to, I think, like you said, Palestinians who are on the ground are trying to just figure out a way to survive. And I think that that's fair. And I think for those of us who are not in that urgency, should be the ones saying, hey, let us do the work of like organizing around this so that we can create more sustainable long-term solutions to this, even after, right? Or whatever after means. But I think you're right. I think we do have to look at just look at organizing a lot more around these issues. And instead of shaming people, like you said, like, should I feel bad for not participating in it? It's like, well, I mean, I don't think so. Like, there's people who can't do that.
And again, it's a larger question. How are we participating in, like
Yeah.
there is many different avenues.
And are we creating alternatives? So if we're not going to go to big banks, okay, are we creating alternatives for that? Are we creating alternatives from shopping at, wherever we're shopping, or on Amazon, right? Like, are we not just creating alternatives, but are we like supporting those, things? And it's difficult.
This strikes me as the conversation with Manachi, and I don't know if you've met Manachi either, but thinking about like decolonizing violent communication, nonviolent communication, because this would be the response. Like when you say you need to strike, I'm say, are you going to pay my bills? Like are you going to feed my children? That's the.
Or are we going to? And it's not even like, are you going to take care of my children? Are we going to come together as a community to care for each other's children, so that those of us who have to work can go, and those of us who, it's. I think it is. It's a. And I love the word you use, curiosity, right? Like, how can we be curious about, rather than, again, that violent communicate, right? It is about nonviolent communication. Instead of saying you should be ashamed for doing this, it's how can I help you to,
or like, what's going on? Like, I mean, I think, one example I like to give, and, I grew up vegetarian, and I'm not like, I tried being vegan for a little bit, and I'm not like knocking anyone who's vegan, but there's this idea. It's like, if we were all vegetarian, then that would save the earth. And it's like, we won't all do one thing. That's just not what's going to happen. Because to do that is actually, to say that is actually very transactional. To say like, let's all just have a strike. It's transactional in the sense that we're not actually doing the work to get to the deeper thing, where it's just like, okay, I can't strike. Why is that? I can't strike because I have my own business. I have to pay my bills. And if I want to actually support the people, again, send them eSIMs, do things to support them, don't I need to have money? Like, I mean, there's so many interrelations here.
Love it.
And whether it's about money or others, you know what I mean? Like, who our friends are, who our employers are. And so to just say, just stop doing this, like to stop having meat, it's like there's people who in their lineages, there's just so much there that's connected to certain types of foods. That's just to say, cut off from that. Like, that isn't relational to me, So I think it's like, it's really hard because in an urgent situation, sometimes we need to slow down. And social media has a way
does not lend itself to slowing down.
But it doesn't lend itself to slowing down. Exactly. So again, I'm not going to say like social media is bad or anything. Like, I've met amazing friends through social media and made amazing connections where I can meet them in real life and actually ask them these questions, But
this relational way of being is kind of juxtaposed with, I keep on thinking of Audre Lorde's, like the master's house, the master's tools, like, and this very Puritan, what was the phrase? Purity culture way of thinking of there's one way. It sounds so monotheistic, perspective when we are such a diverse, population. And I just, as you were saying, like, I have to do it this way. I just, think of all the horror 1984, all these like sci-fi novels around
one
creating
answer.
a future.
Yeah, and I think you explained from this in the beginning, Renee, like in terms of like wanting to like have like a voice of reason, and it's like I too was like, oh my God, who has the right thing to say? But it's like, I don't know, is there one right thing to say right now? Like, people emotions are really high, and that makes sense. Like, this is wild. This is extractive. This is tragic. This is devastating and heartbreaking. Like, how much reason am I going to have right now? Like, how much reason can we expect others to have? Like, and so that might lead to being like, why aren't you saying anything? It's going to lead to a lot of this stuff. So even though I don't think it's sustainable, I want to have compassion for the people who are shaming others. Even shame. I mean, a dear friend reached out to me being like, well, I also think like we have to shame our leaders. okay, fair. Like, is that going to do anything? I'm not sure. But like, I think that it serves an emotional purpose for us to shame. We might get something out of our systems. We might be saying like, our leaders need to listen to us. Like, we are there. Like, they work for us. Like, completely agree.
Yeah, those are the
So
people to be called out. If there's people to be called out instead of called in, it is those.
It's the people in power.
It's the
Yeah.
people
those
in
are the
power.
people who can actually do something, while we're flailing around being like, what is going on? And
Yeah.
at the same time, I do think that like that slowing down also needs to happen. And we just need to think about this stuff, like not to label things good or bad. I mean, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Like when I look at this, I'm like, bad. This is very bad.
Right. Yeah. There's clear.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, there's just like a lot of different layers. And I think it's very complex and we want to make it easy because we want it to stop and go away. I mean, I do too, but I mean, I'm not here to say like the issue is complex. To me, it very much is not. Like I'm not gonna say that. But I think what is complex is how people feel about it, and how people relate to it. That is what is complex. Like the issue itself to me is pretty cut and dry, about what's happening and the whole right side of history thing I thought was interesting. I've not really been saying that. Not because I mean, I do have like a belief about what I want to happen, but I do think it could be shamey and it also kind of leads to that like one answer thing that you were just talking about that I don't know, so I'm questioning that. I'm curious about it too.
Yeah, I think when we, coming back to like social media and sort of like the pros and cons, right? Like it's done so much good, but also, and I think it's when I teach my classes and, I'm talking, these are Gen Zers, right? Like, so they live on social media. There is no world outside of social media. And so it's like, it's like telling them, it's like when you tell people the purity culture, right? Like, don't have sex instead of saying, I know you're going to have sex, so let's have safe sex, right? Or let's talk about safe sex. I think it's a conversation with that. Like, how do we use social media as a tool, not the only tool, right? And how do we have critical literacy around it? Like, it's not saying social media, we're just going to throw it out the window altogether, but it's to say like, how do we use it in a way that's healthy, right? And safe and not destructive. Because I think, God forbid you go into a comment section, in social media, like
I don't even look.
I see a post and I'm like, oh, this sounds good, and then I go into the comment section and I'm like, oh, okay, well,
they were bring their angry driver voices, right? All the time.
It's totally road rage in the comment section.
Yeah,
totally. Or it's someone who says something great and then someone's like, oh, but this person's problematic in this way, and you're like, oh, should I not listen to this? Does this have no value then? Like the whole cancer culture, all that stuff comes into play. I mean, I think one thing that also I've gotten from this is that it's, there are people who are leading, who are bigger voices in this movement. And I have been doing my best to listen to them. And I also think that there is always, no matter what the cause is, no matter what someone's position on it is, there's always a danger in pedestalizing people.
Oh, yes.
I haven't heard
right?
that.
Like they're human. Everyone's human and fallible. And, social media, like, I don't have like a massive following or anything, but like the more I'm being seen, it's like the more projections come onto me and you start feeling a different sense of responsibility or accountability because you have to answer to everybody when I'm still a person. And it's like celebrity culture. It's like, they're still people, you know what I mean? Like,
so Puritan culture like comes hand in hand with like a savior complex like this, right? It's almost like, but
exactly.
Dismantling that instinct is something that is important. But hard.
And it's something. I definitely I love how you were trying to say it, pedestalizing.
I know, it's like pedestalizing.
I always say romanticizing, right? Like we romanticize, even our like MLK Jr., right? We pedestalize him, we romanticize him, and I mean, didn't him and his wife have some didn't he cheat on his wife? I mean,
no, totally, and
like,
I mean, Malcolm X. I love Malcolm X, and he was really misogynist, like, I mean, there's just
is real.
Caesar
a
child
lot of things
too,
are
right?
there,
Like,
right?
yeah, I mean, I think about that, like with Che, right? People talk about Che as this like revolutionary. I'm like, ooh, he was talk about misogyny, right? Like, and so I think it's like, and it's again, it's not like you said, it's not to say that some of their work isn't valuable, but it's to understand it within its larger context, right? And to like not romanticize and to remind ourselves of everybody's humanity. And I think, something that you said, and I think something we've been leaning on a lot is like empathy, right? Like for those who are doing the shaming, empathy, because they're coming from a place of desperation and urgency. And for those who are staying silent, empathy, right? Because they're probably working through something, right? And like you said, those who, I think for me, really something that's been coming up for me is just there's this language even, and I mean, we don't have to get too much into this, but like around Zionism and like anti-Zionism and all this stuff, and then looking and seeing Zionism as a part of purity culture too, or a part of like an ideology, right? Or indoctrination, and having empathy, right? It's like when we have empathy for Christian fundamentalists.
I knew you were going to mention that. I was like, that's the hardest part for me. Talking about my parents.
It's not to say we don't hold them accountable, or we don't. It's okay. Let me make it even easier. Men, right? Like, it's not to say we don't want to hold men accountable for their actions, but it's also recognizing where do those actions come from, right? And having empathy for the fact that they are also hurt little boys that are projecting maybe the violence or the hurt that was inflicted on them, right? And that's when we get into these cycles of violence. And I think we disrupt those cycles with empathy by saying, like, again, not accountability, right? Not with saying like, oh, okay, it's okay that you did this harmful thing, but to say, I understand where that harmful thing comes from, and let's address that, because that's the root cause of the problem to begin with. But anyway, for me, I've been really trying
that is much easier. Thank you.
to lean into like empathy, right? Like, let's have empathy for where everybody's, like you said, it is such a sensitive topic. And I think we have to be mindful, it's like a minefield out there.
It's so tricky to say to have empathy for the oppressor is, to people who have survived the oppressor, is, you don't want to say that to everyone, that's the thing.
I mean, I think, it's like, some Audre Lorde, or the idea of like the oppressed can become the oppressor, right? And intersectionality, right? So we know that we are sometimes simultaneously both oppressed and oppressor, right? Or both oppressed and privileged. And it's just understanding that dynamic, right? It's just saying like, hey, we know we're all in these like cycles of oppression. And I understand, right, the idea of like having empathy for the oppressor, or like, do we shame the oppressor? But I mean, like, the way I see it is, at the end of the day, who is at the top of all this food chain? Rich, white, straight, cis men.
So when we talk, I'm thinking about these circles, right? Like the personal, the micro, the meso, the macro, all these community levels, and how social media is on this huge level, and we're trying to have a conversation about this at that level. And I actually think that's almost impossible to have, or, it's really, when we can have a conversation about having empathy for the oppressor, when it is like my dad, or, at this level, right? At this very personal level, we can get into that,
Yeah. And I think that's why, again, coming back to like community and interpersonal interactions, just human to human connection. Like you said, I love when you say relational. We have to be in relation if we're going to have liberation. I mean,
it's a good one.
Title
of the thing.
Title of the
that
episode.
sounds like a good tattoo, to be quite honest. I kind of like that.
Well, I feel like that's what I've been lacking. Like, I'm like, are we checking it? Like, okay, so we're reposting each other, but are we actually sending a text to the people we know in real life? Right? To the people we know in real life, are we checking in? I've been doing that, because I'm like,
you have been doing that
I'm like, maybe there is fear, I think, sometimes posting publicly in a way that I've never felt fear before, for so many reasons, for so many reasons. But so I'm like, but if I don't feel courage enough to post so many things publicly, I can check in on my friends. Right. And I can say, like, how's it going? How you doing? What do we do? How do we build the revolution together? And I think
you have been great at that. I wanna like just you have been so good with me, but also in our community, the messages, the group chats.
Desperately just because that's the only way I can find grounding. Is like those basic human to human interactions. But I want to get to something too. We also want to talk about coming back to like our work, right? That the other part of this is because we have a lot of academic friends, and I had a friend reach out to me. I checked in on her. I was like, "Hey, how's it going? How you doing? Are you okay? Are you holding up?" This was like in the middle of last semester.
Cancer. Pisces Cancer.
And she was like, how do you, and I remember we had the same conversation when Trump got elected, and she's like, what do we do? What do we do in this moment? And I was like, girl, we've been in this work for a long time, and we just do what we've been doing, and we keep doing it, right? And but it's hard not to, when moments like this happen and our work is already innately, I would say, part of the revolution, right? Is already innately liberatory work, decolonial work. It's hard not to be like you said, we have to do more. But then that leads to burnout, and that's not sustainable.
I think there's another element to this when we talk about this conversation around shame and things like that. I think purity culture, savior complex, it's this Armageddon. It's all very, very kind of like, Old Testament, old forefather shit, because this belief that that's the last piece, and you throw that in there, and then everyone has to like step into savior mode, step into like, and
like we're living in the apocalypse. And so
yes, it's apocalypticizing. Sorry, I didn't want to try it.
Yeah. No, that's where the sense of urgency comes from. It's like the world is ending. And so we don't have time to pause and think and do anything. We have to go into go mode, right? Without recognizing we may be living in the apocalypse, but it's going to take a long time.
It's the F and N times, people, if it's not, and that again, actually is inherent. It actually says this is not sustainable because it's going to end, right? Like we don't have to have something for our children, or because it's just the end.
Maybe that's white supremacy convincing us that it's apocalyptic. Anyway. But I want to hear you speak to like, coming back to your work too, right? Like, how do maybe we are looking for answers, like, how do we do what we do on a daily, but also in this moment without burning out?
Yeah, such a good question. When all of this, I won't say started, because obviously this stuff is happening before October 7th, but when it ignited, I should say, I was like glued to my screen and thinking about stuff. And it's interesting. Like, I feel like my work, just like you said, like it's liberatory work, but at the same time, I was like, what does my work even matter? If I'm like
in this moment.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like I had that feeling where I'm like, okay, I'm helping someone with their mother wound, but what is happening over here? Like, like, I mean, at that moment I was like, I have a deep mother wound, but I'm just like, I want to call my mom and be like, yo, do you see what's happening? Like that didn't even feel like a factor, in those moments. It's really interesting. And I think, knowing that we do inherently do that work, sometimes we just need distance from that. And I think honestly giving ourselves, I mean, I feel like this is an easy answer, but I think it makes sense, just self-compassion, that in those moments we are people who do this work because we deeply feel for others. And when I got to a dark place, my partner was like, I got to a really dark place. I even started having vertigo. And it is actually when I had to start putting my phone away. And because I was looking at so many of the images, and I had guilt because I'm just like, oh, I'm not supposed to look away, but I'm like, I'm having vertigo. Like
Your body was talking to you.
my
It was
body
like,
is
no,
telling me,
honey.
like, how can
Yeah.
I show up for anything if I'm like spinning, you know? And and he was like, you are a deeply feeling person. So when we're a deeply feeling people who do this work because we care, then it makes sense that we might be like, we need to do more, you know? I mean, there might be some scarcity there that's like colonial. Like, I mean, that's always creeping up, right? And I think just having self-compassion, that's like, yeah, I am a deeply feeling person. And that is informing like maybe how I am shaming myself or maybe my guilt. And, you know, I think, you know, one thing I mentioned about guilt specifically is that guilt is a useful emotion in that if we caused harm or did something wrong in some way, guilt drives us to repair. That's a good thing, right? And so while I'm not, you know, bulldozing people in front of hospitals myself, you know, I'm not directly causing harm. There is the whole idea that we are still complicit in all of this, right? So then what is my responsibility? What are the things I can tangibly do? And keep doing, and I'll go back to that word sustainable, in a sustainable way. And what are my gifts too? Like maybe I'm not the person who's going out in the streets all the time. I have like a chronic foot injury. Like I haven't been able to go to anything because I, you know, I mean, we're in LA. There's not easy public transportation for you to just hop off,
Right.
go home. Like, you know, I felt a lot of guilt that I'm like, I'm not on the ground. I'm like, I can do other things that
Feel you.
are supportive. And I mean, in a way, that's how we got connected. And even if I feel like I'm not doing enough, I think having these conversations and reflecting back to each other shows how we're interdependent, shows how we need each other, because we can really chastise ourselves and really shame ourselves and feel terrible about ourselves when we are doing work that's inherently liberatory. So I think really having that self-compassion, knowing that it makes sense that we might feel terrible, and also knowing that, you know, there are some things that we can tangibly do. Am I going to single-handedly subvert capitalism and colonialism? Probably not. And there's magic in the community of people who are willing to do this work in different ways. Because, you know, there's different roles in activism. Like not all of us have to be in the streets, not all of us have to be doing certain things. There's people who are very good at that, and I'm very good at other things. So I'm just going to try to keep doing that as much as I can. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the questions, but that
I love the way that you talk. I can see that beautiful Libra stallion. You have just such an organized way, balanced way of thinking and articulating.
I mean,
maybe it's the Leo rising.
I was going to say the Virgo, the Sagittarius, the Leo, and the Libra. That's like a very, I mean, the Libra is always a good balance. My husband's a Libra, and thank God, or else I would be.
Yeah.
I would be in my emotions all the time. But no, everything you're saying is totally. We're going to be doing our book club next week on the book Social Change Now, the author Deepa Iyer, and she talks directly about that, right? Like, how do we find our role in the ecosystem? And but I think that self-compassion part is so important, because we do get in those like guilt, shame, you know, spirals, and like you said, when you know, vertigo, my body does the same thing when there's too much. I mean, I was, you know, right before the holidays, I started to feel something, and I feel like I just recovered from all of that, like last week, you know, after I started taking melatonin to go to sleep because I wasn't getting sleep, you know. And but it's in that and since being able to get sleep and kind of see clearly, I'm better able to step into what I want to do, you know, from a place that feels right, or feels like, oh, this is where my gifts can shine. And I think it's a reminder that if we, like you said, if you're having vertigo, how can you step up anyway? Like, we can't do anything if our bodies are literally not able to do so.
It's interesting, the gifts of I'm going to group you in here, the 40 somethings, you know, bodies. I don't know if that's right. I hope I'm not, you know. My body does talk to me in a stronger way, you know, and there are like, you know, they say that this stress affects your body. They said that to my whole life. And I'm like, okay, it's real. We need to, like, I need to be there, you know, for my kid when he's grown up. I need
Yeah.
to like be able to walk. I also have an injury that I'm healing from, and
Mm.
like creating those spaces so that those needs, you know, of this body that I have right here, you know,
Yeah.
so that it can meet the needs of other people, you know, like
Yeah.
that was your tag, right? That helpers, like helping
Themselves.
Yes.
themselves,
Helpers who
you
want to
know.
help themselves.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 Yeah. I think too, like, you know, again, just kind of in the conversations that I've been having with friends, and I try to remind people, like, especially
Mhm.
those with children, like, especially those who've decided
Who are
to,
caretakers.
who are caretakers, but, you know, who want to parent in different ways, right? Like in decolonial ways. And I'm like, that's just being able to like feed your kid and not yell at them, like just being able to go a day parenting kids. I'm like, sometimes that's enough.
Yeah.
That's what you got to do. And it's so hard, but that self-compassion part is
Mhm.
important, and sometimes the
Yes. It
hardest
really
part.
is.
Like, it's so easy to be like, when she comes to me with stuff, I'm like, you just got, it's okay. Like, you know, you trying to give her permission to like
Yeah.
feel feelings, but then I don't even do that for myself. Right. But
Yeah.
luckily we
Yeah.
have each other to be that mirror, and she can say
Exactly.
the same
And
thing to
that's so
me.
important. That's so important. That's what I tell my coaching clients. I'm like, you are the best authority on yourself, and I'm here to be a mirror for you because we need each other. Like, I'm not going to figure out things in my head at 3 in the morning when I'm in bed. Like, let's face it. Have we ever figured it out at 3 in the
No.
morning when we're spinning? Like,
So I'm
probably
like,
not.
just go to sleep.
You know, I
Just go to
remember
sleep.
something that's coming through to me right now is, you know, Toy Smith. She does a lot of like business like strategy, but she's very anti-capitalist.
Mm.
I don't know if you are familiar with her, but she had an email once where she's like, you know, she's done a lot of really great work for like single Black mothers, like raising like a lot of money to support them
Mm.
through like mutual aid. And in one email she wrote, you know what? I'm not trying to save the world. I'm trying to pay attention to the 500 feet around me. And that really
Mm.
like said something to me. Like, what about the colonizer in my head? What about how I'm in my relationships when I react strongly to someone, when I'm like, whoa, why did I do that? Like, how is that colonial? You know? So really thinking about the oppressor within my, excuse me, within myself
Mhm.
and what's happening. And like, I think that that's really, really important. And I'm not saying like don't care about the world or whatever, but like that is going to impact the world. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can imagine being a parent. It's like these young ones are going to be growing up in this world and be responsible
Yeah.
for, you know, also a world where like climate change is like
Oh
continuing to
God, yeah.
happen, right? Like, sorry, not to bring it up, but
Yeah.
you know what
No,
I
no.
mean? Like, it's
We're
very
we know.
so they're going to have a responsibility at that
Yeah.
point, right? So like and you know, I also think about that with my content, and you know, it's funny, like as you were saying, like voice of reason, you're like, then you saw my reel, and I was like, what? That was when I was looking for a voice of reason, and it's like that's why we do what we do, so we can share and hear stuff from others, because that is shaping our reality. That is what brought us here together today, and that's going to now, when you put this out, hopefully other people will see something and make even
Yes.
an extension or a different type of relationship. And like, I hope so. I wish I could hear all about it, you know. So
Yeah.
that impact is definitely possible, and
Yeah.
it's out there, and I have to believe that, you know, in order
Yeah.
not just to keep doing my work, but just to know that that hope is there. I mean, there's that book by Miriam Kaba, We Do This Till We Free Us, and she says hope is a
Mm.
discipline, and I really try to think,
Mm.
yeah,
That
right,
is a good
which really, I was
one.
like, ooh, that's good. Like, hope is a discipline. And when I think of the word discipline, it's not always a positive connotation, but I try to
Yeah.
remember that the root
A
word is
practice.
disciple. And like, so how
Yeah.
am I a disciple to hope? How am I like learning from it? How can I
Ooh.
be a teacher of it? Like all of the different relationships and levels of that.
Yeah. Oh, I hope is it's what I desperately hold on to. Like you said, like, you know, we are well aware of the world our kids are going to inherit. And I feel sometimes very like, a few months ago I had a breakdown of like,
Despairing.
what did I do
Mhm.
bringing the kids into this world? And then I see them and I see the things that they say and do, and I'm like, oh, we're good. You know,
Yeah.
like I think, you know, my son, is a, you know, my oldest son, he's an environmentalist at heart. He
Aw.
you know, he loves animals and trees and nature. He gets upset when there's litter.
Our kids are amazing.
We were at the arboretum and he's like, he put, you know, he picked up this little thing and he's like, I was like, just put in your pocket until we find a trash can. But so and I think our students too, when I see my students come in with such enthusiasm and access to information, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm good. Like, we're good. Like, that gives me, you know, so much hope. And I think it's hard when other people will say things like, these young people, you know, like there's this very, like, I don't know, condescending, you know,
their
attitude.
values are different.
And
you
I'm
know?
like, no, I think the kids are gonna, I think I have hope, because like I love the hope as a discipline. I have blind faith in hope. I mean, you know, I just do. You know, it's the only thing that I can, you know, that can be that beacon.
Jaguar said to me the other day, I think I told you when I was crying about something, and he's like, it's okay, mama. I cried today too. You know, like, and I think that's it, right? That's the relational piece that and they're modeling it for us.
Yeah. They're gonna, you know, they'll be the culture bearers, and, you know, they'll take on the next phase of revolution and liberation.
So what does the, you know, senora or like doña, you know, advocacy look like? Like, what
in our old age,
to be, you know, in our 50s and 60s, you know, as, what is that, you know, like, I don't know. That's
I honestly, I'm hoping that we get to be on an island.
Right.
And
or
we get
just
to
like
be
be in a home together and just
yes, and
golden
you
girls type of
youngins
life.
go and do it, and you can come visit us for our words of wisdom,
Yes,
and our medicine. But we're gonna be chilling.
Yeah. Well, I even think like, you know, I love like trees, and I love thinking about metaphors about trees. It's like we're just going to keep growing branches and reaching out and just be further extensions and extrapolations of ourselves. And I think even like with hope, it's like it's almost like no, there's no choice. I have to have hope, because what I love and who I am, and I mean, it sounds like who both of you are, it's just like people who believe in these principles, and therefore there has to be hope for it. Like there is no choice. So that having that discipline to remember that, you know, is it's like the remembering of it, I think, is really important too.
Yeah.
But I think hard though.
Oh, it's hard.
So
it's hard.
This has been such a wonderful
I'm like, I think
conversation.
hope is such a great place to like land. And yeah, because I try to do that with my students sometimes. I'm like, I spend the whole semester telling them how shitty the world is. And then I'm like, no, but there's hope. Right, let's
you guys go out there.
Yeah. So I always have to remind myself, let's end on hope. But tell us and tell our listeners where they can find you, how they can be in touch.
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram. My handle is Healing Hype Girl. I love to hype up that healing for y'all. And then my website is nishaland.com, because who doesn't want to go to Nishaland? I always say sign up for my newsletter, because there is social media, but I own my newsletter. So if you go to my website, there'll be a pop-up for you to get a free values workbook, because values are really important to me. And then you'll be added to my email list. So yeah, those are the main places you can find me.
Thank you so much.
When is your birthday exactly? Can I ask you that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, September 6th.
Oh, 81. I'm the 4th.
Like, need a year.
Nice. That's awesome.
Thank you. I love it. Thank you so much. This has been so validating, so needed. Thank you.
Yeah, for myself too. So thank you so much for the invitation, and for even just having this conversation, introducing it. I think it's so important.